1st of July, NASA detected a mysterious object speeding toward Earth, and some actual bona fide experts think it might not be your typical space rock or maybe any kind of rock.
We now have an A6 Lemon and R2 Swan objects.
I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do this. Basically, 3I Atlas is now approaching Earth, and they found a new comet called Swan that is 25 times bigger than 3I Atlas. Just so happens, in the last 48 hours, they found 7 new dark comets that are coming from behind the sun.
Dude, what are you supposed to be here? Are you a dark state spaceologist or what? I love it when they put their backpacks on the front to make it look like a plate carrier. But absolutely nothing that this guy has said, or the whole internet for that matter, seems to actually be true when it comes to 3I Atlas and its supposed friends. Like he just said, in the last 24 hours, 7 new dark comets have been discovered. Well, you might have just learned about this in the last 24 hours, but the rest of the scientific community, which you are not a part of, has known about this since December 12th, 2024. So unless you broke out your tractor beam to slow them puppies down, they're long gone. And as far as Comet Swan being 25 times bigger than Atlas, let's talk about that. Just so everybody knows, these are the new super high-def Hubble images that everybody keeps talking about, but this is the best image we've got of this thing. And they say that Hubble's observations allow astronomers to more accurately estimate the size of the comet's solid icy nucleus. The upper limit on the diameter of the nucleus is 3.5 miles, though it could be as small as 1,000 feet. Now, 1,000 feet is 0.18 miles, so the upper estimates on size is 95% bigger than the smaller estimates. Or in other words, they're estimating an accuracy of 5%. Or another way of looking at it is it's somewhere between 1,000 and 18,500 feet, which means that they're just dead-ass guessing just like everything else. Everything is theoretical physics now instead of observational, where as long as you come up with an equation that adds up in the end, then it's scientific fact with no observational, demonstrationable, real-world 3D proof. So I wanted to get into this on that video about the comet, but I didn't want to make it a 30-minute video. What the heck is space anyway? Now, due to the history of geoshapiosity online, I know a lot of people take all this way too personally. So you know what? Think whatever you want to think, and learn to live with the fact that not everybody always agrees. And, you know, this subject has been polarized to the point, just like every other subject, that either you have to agree that it's all fake, or you're standing up for everything that NASA ever said about it. Well, how about a third option here? I don't believe either one of you. You got Space.com and Discovery Channel, which sold its soul way back in the early 2000s, saying things like, exoplanet with iron rain has violent winds like something out of a science fiction movie. Yes, iron is in the metal, rain. Because apparently if you heat iron up enough, it will just vaporize, and then when it cools down, it will condense and fall as a liquid metal. I'm calling bullshit. Why don't you give me a practical demonstration of this, Einstein? Let's superheat some metal, watch it vaporize, and then condense out of thin air and fall down as metal rain. And for it to be liquid metal, it has to be between 1,500 and 2,800 degrees Celsius. In the big picture of things, that's a pretty narrow band of temperature. And I'm assuming that's at 1 barometric pressure. Is that what we're getting at here? Because atmospheric pressure plays a role in this. This is all just pure scientism, folks. There's nothing real about it. It's science fiction that they've convinced otherwise intelligent adults is real. And it's amazing what you can convince a normally intelligent person of. It's the lab coat effect. You put somebody in a position of power and of authority, and then you grade the students on how well they can regurgitate what the authoritarian view is, and nobody ever wonders if any of it's right in the first place. You guys remember them supposedly flying a drone on Mars a few years ago? Well, let's play by their own set of rules here. They say that Mars has less than 1% of Earth's atmosphere, which is all but a vacuum. And then Action Lab, which is like a legit science guy channel, a very effeminate guy, which I think that's done on purpose. They're showing kids that an intelligent, educated academician talks like a valley girl in his experiments. instead of like a man. I'm telling you, the assaults on our culture are nonstop. But okay, so a big science guy puts his drone in a vacuum and nope, it doesn't move a bit. Been a while since I watched it, but I think his propellers broke because there was no surface tension. But he does a real-world scientific experiment here and determines that a drone can't fly in a vacuum, and his conclusion is, get this, that makes NASA's engineering that much more impressive because they somehow found a way to make a drone fly in a vacuum where nobody else can. Dude, are you really that blind? Can you really not just see that you just proved that they're lying? Apparently not. So there appears to be the people that will hold to whatever the lab coat tells them, and then there's the flip side of the coin, it's all fake. Well, you know what? I can prove that idea wrong 7 nights a week. Go outside on any night that's not too cloudy, look up, and that's what we've all agreed to call space. In the past, they called it the heavens or the abyss or the great void. But everything you see that isn't the ground is what we're calling space. So yes, space is real. There's something up there, or there's a whole lot of nothing up there, depending on how you look at it. But it's always amazed me that people can just say, oh, it's fake, and act like that's an explanation for what I see every night. But National Aeronautics Space Agency has been caught in way too many lies for me to believe very much of what they say. YouTube used to be full of videos showing what BS they're selling. And that worked out great up until the age of the internet where people could actually analyze what they're looking at. They had to show everybody something for where all that money's going. At one point, they got 4% of the U.S. budget annually, which is probably more than any private company on Earth. But there's all kinds of stuff that they say about all this that just doesn't add up. And I know you guys can list a million of them. I'm just coming up with the first ones that come to mind. But first off, the magical spacesuit. And according to them, if you're in space and not in direct sunlight, then the temperatures can get down to negative 250 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you are in direct sunlight, then it goes up to 250 degrees, just a little under what we bake with. So I'm not going to dig up the footage, but we've all seen it. Guy up here floating along outside the International Space Station, and you're over here where you're in the shade, so it's negative 250 degrees. Then 2 seconds later, you spin around, you're in direct sunlight that's positive 250 degrees, and somehow this 1/8 inch of fabric suit keeps the guy inside at a nice, comfortable 75 degrees the whole time. Yeah, right. When they start saying that they've got technologies that only work in space, but we can't replicate here on Earth, then you better start questioning what they're selling. How about this? Why don't you slap on your little suit and go down here to Antarctica and spend 3 hours outside of this diesel-powered behemoth that keeps everybody warm in the winter? It gets so cold that they have to literally chop up the diesel fuel. They put it in the tank in chunks, and then they have a warmer in there to liquefy it. And even then, they say if it gets down to temperatures of negative 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you're done for. But you can slap on this little suit and go into space and handle negative 250 degrees 1 second, positive 250 degrees the next second. So next, why don't you slap on your little magical suit and stand at the front door of an inferno and play firefighter at 250 degrees and let me see how well that suit works? No, you can't show me anything like that at all, but this one can go from negative 250 to positive 250, no problem. And the other thing is the so-called spacecraft itself. The pressurized aluminum hull itself is relatively thin, about 0.3 centimeters, which is just under 1/8 of an inch. So maybe 2, hell, let's be generous, we'll say 3 Coke cans thick. But then they say that it's surrounded by high-tech fabrics up to 4 inches thick. Okay, same thing. Let's see your 3 Coke cans thick with 4 inches of blanket on the inside of it survive down here in Antarctica for a few hours. See, they demonize the internal combustion engine at every turn they possibly can. But have you guys ever had a vehicle that the heater didn't work in wintertime? I got one right now. It's freaking cold. We wouldn't even be living the lives we're living today without this technology. And the only thing keeping these people alive is that diesel engine. But somehow these guys can all get together and have an international space pajama party flying through negative 250 degrees shadow of the Earth for 90 minutes with nothing to keep them warm except for a couple of solar panels, which, by the way, basically no batteries work at less than 10 degrees Fahrenheit. That's why your battery has a cold cranking amps rating on the side of it. Cold weather and batteries do not mix, but somehow these guys are able to draw enough energy through solar panels to keep them warm even when they're not in the sunlight. Guys, you cannot heat a house here on Earth when it's 30 degrees outside with just solar panels. It would take an entire football field in direct sunlight. Then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Van Allen belts and our trip to the moon, where the radiation is apparently millions of times more intense than that of a microwave oven, but we just didn't notice it when we were on the way. Yeah, let's put a frog in a Coke can and then crank the microwave up to 1,000,000 and see if he notices. It seems like with untold trillions of dollars spent in space research, that some of that money would be spent on observing the most important thing in our little solar system here, our sun, the thing that gives us all life that we know of. Now, we do have a lot of ground-based observation. Some of you guys might keep up with this, the sunspot counts and all that. And you can watch them come around the eastern limb and rotate across over several days. There's all kinds of footage from amateur astronomers that observe the same thing. So yeah, it appears to be rotating. But it seems like it'd be kind of important to observe the far side of the sun, right? Well, supposedly we do have this, stereo A and stereo B, that are supposed to be at other sides of the orbit, getting us an angle of the sun that we can't see from here on Earth. Well, that seems like a really good idea. Now we can see what huge sunspots are forming on the other side of the sun before they come around that eastern limb, right? No. We use helioseismology to estimate what's happening on the other side of the sun, not observe. We're still observing from Earth's point of view, only we're using the little tiny ripples around the edge to guess what's happening on the other side. So if you've got 2 satellites up there specifically tasked with observing the far side of the sun, yet you can't give me any observations of the far side of the sun, then what does that mean? Well, it means the American public's been conned out of untold quantities of money. And once you've lied to everybody about one thing, then that throws everything else you've ever said into question. So then you have a lot of people like me that don't know exactly what to think about it. You know, the Hubble Space Telescope was allegedly launched when I was in high school, and there is so much that we believe today that comes from this and the James Webb Telescope. Now, did you know that this was launched in 1990 and was designed for a 15-year lifespan, but it's been in operation for over 30 years due to 5 successful space shuttle servicing missions? So now we're catching satellites, and now it'll probably easily last into 2030 and 2040. But if you ask the Google man, he says, no one has ever, quote, captured an orbiting satellite in the sense of bringing it back to Earth or seizing it in orbit. However, there have been instances of spacecraft retrieving space debris. So we can't capture and service satellites, but somehow we caught the space telescope 5 times. I think they're just ballooning up telescopes above the interference levels of our atmosphere. Most observations of space are still ground-based. Even with their $10 billion space telescope here, which is probably just floating around on a balloon, the majority of comets are discovered by amateurs in their backyard doing this for fun. Comet Swan, that's allegedly 25 times bigger than 3I Atlas, was discovered by a dude in his backyard. And I mean, that's got to be an awesome discovery for somebody, you know? But when Johnny and his $1,000 telescope are discovering things that scientists with an unlimited budget can't find, then something's wrong. After launching Hubble back in the 90s, then we started getting images like this from, quote, deep space. And I'm not going to lie, I used to be a little science nerd and ate this stuff up. But then I realized that there's nothing in our universe that even looks remotely like what they are showing here. The X-rays are shown in red, gamma in green, all of these different colors to depict what they're picking up outside of the visible light spectrum. There is nothing that actually looks anything like this. They're just coloring in. Our sun emits all kinds of X-rays. So if you use this exact same method to photograph the moon at night, you would see the moon with all this swirling red fire around it. This doesn't exist. It's an artistic interpretation. Another one I love is if you want to know what a certain substance is, what something's made of, Well, here on Earth, you have to scratch it and burn it and crush it and see how it reacts to acid. And you have to do all of these tests to figure out what a substance is. But in space, when it's a gazillion miles away, then no, we just use a spectroscope and we break down the light waves. And we can tell you that that moon has rivers of liquid methane, something that only comes from fossils here on Earth, allegedly. But according to them, there's no contradiction there. Yeah, methane on Earth comes from organic origins, but if it's a little speck of light a bazillion miles away, then we know it had to have formed through other means. So I got all kinds of problems with the quackademic version of this. Another big problem is these are all supposed to be thousands of light years from Earth. So that would mean that we're looking at something that happened thousands of years ago. And I just can't buy that. How do we know everything's still there? Everything could have burned out thousands of years ago and we wouldn't know it. So the majority of this I just take with a grain of salt. One thing that I do think is an unwise assumption to make is when people tell me that comets, meteors are not physical objects, when there's literally millions of tons of evidence to the contrary. There's literally channels of meteorite hunters that go out and find these when they fall down, and some of them are worth big bucks depending on what's in it. But it's a different chemical makeup of everything else around, usually covered in a layer of molten metal from entering our atmosphere. But I think Earth's interaction with comets, meteors, asteroids, whatever you want to call them, have been the most significant world age-ending events that we know of. But this all gets ignored by people and the tons of evidence because they say there's a firmament, which is basically an undefined term. But let me just point something out. What is the only primary source for the idea of a firmament? The Old Testament. Now, I've done all kinds of videos showing how the Old Testament is just one tribe's interaction with a little g God. And the majority of my audience here at least entertains the idea. But the Old Testament is not the ineffable God imparting his wisdom of the cosmos to us little peons. And I think most people that have seen those videos accept that. But you're still going to take one line from that book that says that there's a firmament over us, that it never even says that it's some impenetrable thing. Like I said, it's a completely undefined term that people have filled in the blanks on and deemed it to be this impenetrable dome, and therefore comets and meteorites are not real. So sorry, I find that an unwise position to ignore mountains of evidence, literally millions of tons of meteorites have been found, and ignore all of that because one line in a book about an old trickster god. But you know what? Like I said at the beginning of the video, sometimes people are just going to disagree, and that's the way it is. So that's fine. You believe what you believe. I'll believe what I believe. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter one little bit. When the day comes that I meet my maker, I doubt there's going to be some guy standing there with a little book saying, firmament, no firmament. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out. Those are Ruckus's favorite words. Now he knows that I'm done making the video.